The hospital parking lot was almost empty at 6 in the morning. Lucy Rodriguez sat on a cold metal bench outside the main entrance, holding her two little brothers close to her chest. 10-year-old Carlos had finally stopped crying, but his face was still red and puffy. 8-year-old Danny hadn't said a word since the doctor came out 3 hours ago. "She's gone," the doctor had said quietly. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." Their mama Rosa had been fighting cancer for 2 long years. Lucy remembered when it all started. Mama had been working 2 jobs, cleaning hotel rooms during the day and stocking shelves at the grocery store at night. She never complained, not even when she got so tired she could barely stand up. "Mia," she used to tell Lucy, "we do what we have to do for family, but the sickness was stronger than Mama's will to fight." And now, at 17 years old, Lucy was alone with her 2 little brothers and no idea what to do next. She pulled out the crumpled envelope from her jacket pocket. Inside was all the money they had left in the world, $127. Mama had been saving every penny for the rent, but now there was no point. Their landlord had already told them they had to move out by the end of the week. "Lucy," Carlos whispered, "what's going to happen to us now?" She tried to smile, but her lips were shaking. "Don't worry about it, okay? I'll figure something out." But the truth was, she had no idea. Child services would come looking for them soon. The hospital had already asked about their family. Lucy had lied and said their aunt was coming, but there was no aunt. No uncle, no grandparents. Their father had walked out on them when Danny was just 2 years old, and they hadn't heard from him since. The social worker at the hospital had been nice enough, but Lucy knew what would happen. They would split them up. Carlos and Danny would go to different foster homes, and she might end up in a group home since she was almost 18. The thought of being separated from her brothers made her stomach hurt. "I'm hungry," Danny said quietly. These were the first words he had spoken. All night, Lucy looked at her watch. The hospital cafeteria wouldn't open for another hour, and she didn't want to spend their money on overpriced food anyway. She remembered there was a fast food place down the street that served breakfast early. "Come on," she said, helping both boys stand up. "Let's go get some food, and then we'll figure out what to do." They walked slowly down the sidewalk. The morning air was cold, and none of them had brought jackets heavy enough for this weather. Lucy's mind was racing. She needed to think of a plan before the social workers started looking for them. At the restaurant, she ordered the cheapest items on the menu, 3 small breakfast sandwiches and 1 coffee that they could all share. While the boys ate, she stared out the window at the empty street. "Remember when Mama used to tell us stories about when she was young?" she asked suddenly. Carlos looked up from his sandwich. "Yeah, about working on that ranch place," she said. "It was the happiest time of her life," Lucy continued. "Before she moved to the city, before she met Papa." Danny nodded slowly. She said the man who owned the ranch was really nice to her. Lucy felt something stirring in her chest. Not quite hope, but maybe the beginning of an idea. Mama had talked about that ranch many times over the years. It was somewhere out in the hill country, maybe 3 or 4 hours' drive from the city. She had worked there one summer when she was 16, helping take care of horses and doing kitchen work. "The owner and his wife treated me like family," Mama had always said. "I wish I could have stayed there forever." Of course, that was more than 20 years ago. The people might not even be there anymore, but what choice did they have? Lucy made her decision quickly before she could change her mind. "Boys, we're going on a trip." "Where?" Carlos asked. "To find that ranch Mama used to talk about." They walked back to the hospital parking lot where Mama's old Honda was parked. The car was 15 years old and had more than 200,000 miles on it, but it still ran. Lucy had been driving it for 2 years, ever since Mama got 2. Sick to drive herself to work, she opened the trunk and looked at their belongings. 3 garbage bags full of clothes, a box of family photos, and a few other personal items. Everything they owned in the world fit easily in the back of the small car. "Are we really leaving?" Danny asked as they got in the car. "Yeah, we are," Lucy said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. The gas tank was half full. which should be enough to get them where they needed to go. She had studied the map on her phone and found several ranches in the area where Mama used to work. If she couldn't find the exact one, maybe they could find work at one of the others. As they drove through the city streets in the early morning light, Lucy felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. For the first time in months, they were doing something instead of just waiting for bad things to happen. "Lucy," Carlos said from the back seat, "what if we can't find it?" "Then we'll find something else," she replied. "Mama always said we're survivors. We're gonna be okay." But as they reached the highway and started driving toward the hill country, Lucy wasn't sure if she believed her own words. The morning sun was getting brighter, and soon people would start looking for them. Social workers, maybe even police. She pressed harder on the gas pedal. Behind her, both boys had fallen asleep. They were exhausted from the long, terrible night at the hospital. Lucy was tired too, but she forced herself to stay alert. The highway stretched out ahead of them, leading toward an uncertain future. She thought about Mama and all the sacrifices she had made for them. Working 2 jobs, going without things she needed so the boys could have school supplies and decent clothes. Never complaining, never giving up, even when the cancer made her so weak she could barely get out of bed. "I won't let them split us up, Mama," Lucy whispered to herself. "I promise." The old Honda kept rolling down the highway, carrying 3 scared kids toward whatever came next. Lucy had no way of knowing that in just a few hours, their lives would change in ways she could never have imagined. She had no way of knowing that sometimes when you have nowhere left to go, you might just find yourself exactly where you belong. For now, she just drove, holding on to hope and the steering wheel with equal determination, while her 2 little brothers slept peacefully in the back seat, trusting her to keep them safe and keep them together, no matter what. The morning sun was getting hot when the old Honda finally started making that terrible noise. Lucy had been driving for almost 3 hours, following the GPS on her phone through winding country roads. Carlos and Danny were still sleeping in the back seat, exhausted from their long night at the hospital. The car started shaking and black smoke began coming from under the hood. Lucy's heart sank as she pulled over to the side of the road. She turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, trying not to panic. "What's wrong?" Carlos asked, waking up and rubbing his eyes. "The car broke down," Lucy said, trying to keep her voice calm. "But don't worry. We're close to where we need to be." She wasn't sure if that was true, but she had to stay positive for her brothers. According to her phone, they were only about 10 miles from the area where Mama used to work. The problem was, 10 miles might as well be 100 miles when you're walking with 2 tired kids and everything you own. Danny woke up and looked around at the empty country road. There were fields on both sides, with a few cows grazing in the distance. "No houses, no gas stations, nothing. Are we lost?" he asked. Quietly. Double quotes. "No, we're not lost," Lucy said. "We just need to walk a little bit." She got out of the car and opened the trunk. Their 3 bags of clothes were heavy, but she could carry one and each of the boys could take a smaller one. She left the box of photos in the car. They could come back for it later. If there was a later, they started walking down the dusty road. The sun was getting higher, and it was going to be a hot day. Lucy tried to remember everything Mama had told her about the ranch. It was called Cedar Creek Ranch, and it was owned by a man named Tom and his wife. But that was 20 years ago. Mama had said they were older even then, so they might not even be alive anymore. After walking for about an hour, they saw a mailbox up ahead. Lucy's heart jumped with hope. As they got closer, she could see it said Cedar Creek Ranch in faded letters. This was it. This was the place Mama had talked about. The driveway was long and dusty, lined with cedar trees on both sides. They walked slowly, their bags getting heavier with each step. Finally, they saw buildings up ahead, a big house, a barn, and several smaller buildings, but the place looked different than Lucy had imagined. Some of the fences were broken, and there was tall grass growing everywhere. It looked like nobody had taken care of it in a long time. "I don't think anyone lives here," Carlos said. Lucy was starting to think the same thing, but they had come too far to give up now. They walked up to the main house and climbed the steps to the front porch. The wood was old and creaky under their feet. Lucy knocked on the door and waited. Nothing. She knocked again, louder this time. "Hello?" she called out. "Is anyone home?" Still nothing. She was about to give up when she heard a noise coming from the barn. It sounded like someone was moving around inside. "Stay here," she told her brothers and walked toward the barn. The big barn doors were open, and she could see someone inside working on something. As she got closer, she saw it was an older man with gray hair and a beard. He was fixing a piece of farm equipment and didn't notice her at first. "Excuse me, Lucy," said softly. The man looked up, surprised. He was probably in his 60s, with kind eyes and work clothes that had seen better days. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked toward her. "Well, hello there," he said. "I wasn't expecting visitors. You lost?" Lucy's throat felt tight. Was it the moment that would decide everything? "Are you Tom, the owner of Cedar Creek Ranch?" The man looked confused. "Tom was my brother. He passed away about 5 years ago. I'm Ben Morrison. I've been trying to keep this place running since then, but it's not easy for one person." Lucy felt her hopes crashing down. Tom was dead. His wife was probably dead too. And this Ben person didn't know anything about Mama or why they were here. "I'm looking for someone who used to work here," she said, her voice shaking. "My mama, Rosa Rodriguez. She worked here about 20 years ago." Ben's face changed completely. His eyes got wide and he dropped the rag he was holding. "Rosa?" he said. "Little Rosa who worked in the kitchen that summer, with the big smile and the pretty voice?" Lucy nodded, too surprised to speak. "Well, I'll be," Ben said, shaking his head. "How is Rosa? Is she with you?" That's when Lucy started crying. All the sadness and fear she had been holding inside came pouring out. "She died yesterday morning. Cancer, and we got nowhere to go." Ben stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. Then he walked over and put his hand on Lucy's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, child. Rosa was special. My brother and his wife loved her like she was their own daughter. They talked about her for years after she left." Lucy wiped her eyes and tried to pull herself together. "I'm Lucy, and those are my brothers, Carlos and Danny. We drove here because Mama always said this was the happiest place she ever lived. But I understand if you can't help us. We'll figure something out." Ben looked past her at the two boys standing by the house, holding their bags and looking scared and tired. "How old are you kids?" he asked. "I'm 17. Carlos is 10 and Danny is 8. Ben was quiet for a long moment, looking at the 3 children who had shown up at his ranch with nowhere else to go. Lucy could see him thinking, trying to decide what to do. "You know," he said finally, "this place has been pretty lonely since Tom and his wife passed. Too quiet, too empty, and I could use some help around here." Lucy looked up at him, not daring to hope. "I can't promise anything permanent," Ben continued. "But you kids look like you need a place to rest and figure things out, and I need help with the animals in the house. Maybe we can help each other for a while?" Lucy felt like she couldn't breathe. "You mean we can stay?" Ben smiled for the first time since they'd been talking. "Well, if you're Rosa's kids, then you're already family as far as I'm concerned. This place could use some life in it again." He walked with Lucy back toward the house where Carlos and Danny were waiting. When he got close enough, he called out to them. "You boys hungry? I was just about to make some lunch." Danny looked at Lucy and she nodded. For the first time in days, she felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. "Come on," Ben said, opening the front door. "Let's get you settled in. We've got a lot to talk about." The first few weeks at Cedar Creek Ranch were harder than Lucy had expected. Ben had given them the guest bedroom upstairs, which had 2 twin beds and an old couch that folded out. It was more space than they'd had in their tiny apartment back in the city, but everything felt strange and unfamiliar. Danny barely spoke to anyone except Lucy. He would follow her around the ranch like a shadow, afraid she might disappear if he let her out of his sight. At night, he had nightmares about Mama and would wake up crying. Lucy would hold him until he fell back asleep, But she was exhausted from taking care of everyone. Carlos was angry all the time. He snapped at Danny for little things, refused to help with chores, and spent most of his time sitting alone behind the barn. When Ben tried to talk to him, Carlos would just walk away. Lucy knew he was hurting, but she didn't know how to help him. "He blames me," Lucy told Ben one evening as they sat on the front porch. "He thinks it's my fault Mama died. If I hadn't made her work so much, maybe she would have gone to the doctor sooner." Ben rocked back and forth in his old wooden chair. "Grief makes people say things they don't mean. He'll come around. What if he doesn't? What if I can't keep us together?" Ben looked at her with those kind eyes of his. "You know, when Tom died, I was angry too. Angry at him for leaving me with this big ranch to take care of. Angry at myself for not being a better brother when he was alive. Sometimes anger is just sadness wearing a disguise." Lucy had been trying so hard to be strong for her brothers that she hadn't let herself really grieve for Mama. She felt tears starting to come, but she wiped them away quickly. "It's okay to cry," Ben said gently. "Your Mama wouldn't want you carrying all this weight by yourself." That night, Lucy finally let herself cry for real. She cried for Mama, for the life they'd lost, for the fear that she wasn't good enough to take care of Carlos and Danny. She cried until there were no more tears left. The next morning, things started to change slowly. Ben had an old border collie named Rusty who had been limping around the ranch for weeks. The dog was getting old and had arthritis in his back legs, but he still tried to help Ben with the cattle every day. Danny noticed Rusty struggling to get up the porch steps and started helping him. Soon, Danny was spending hours with the old dog, brushing his fur and talking to him in a soft voice. It was the first time since Mama died that Lucy had seen her little brother really smile. "Animals know when someone needs them," Ben explained. To Lucy, "Rusty's been lonely since Tom passed. I think he and Danny are helping each other." Carlos was a different story. He was still angry and wouldn't talk to anyone. But one morning, Lucy found him in the barn with one of the horses. It was a young Mary named Star who had been abused by her previous owner. She was nervous around people and would kick or bite if anyone got too close, but there was Carlos, sitting on a hay bale about 10 feet away from Star, just talking to her quietly. The horse was listening, her ears pointed toward him. "She's scared too," Carlos said when he noticed Lucy watching. "Just like us." Lucy's heart almost broke. She realized that Carlos wasn't really angry at her or at Mama. He was scared and hurt, and he didn't know how to deal with those feelings. "Maybe you could help Ben train her," Lucy suggested. "He says she's too wild to ride, but maybe she just needs someone who understands her." Carlos shrugged, but Lucy could see he was interested. Over the next few weeks, Carlos spent more and more time with Star. He would sit with her, brush her when she let him, and talk to her about everything he was feeling. Slowly, the horse began to trust him. And slowly, Carlos began to heal. Ben watched all of this happening and never pushed any of them to talk or open up. He just made sure there was always food on the table and gave them space to figure things out. But Lucy could see that having them there was helping him too. The ranch felt more alive than it had in years. One evening, as they were all sitting down to dinner, Danny looked up from his plate and said, "Ben, do you think Mama would be happy that we're here?" Ben smiled. "I think your Mama would be very proud of all three of you. You've been through something terrible, but you're still taking care of each other. That's what family does." "Are we family now?" Danny asked. Lucy held her breath, waiting for Ben's answer. She knew they couldn't stay at the ranch forever. Eventually, someone from social services would come looking for them. They would ask questions about guardianship and legal custody. Ben was being kind, but he wasn't really their family. "Well," Ben said slowly, "family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about people who choose to take care of each other. And as far as I'm concerned, you three belong here as much as anyone." That night, Lucy lay awake thinking about what Ben had said. For the first time since Mama died, she felt like maybe they were going to be okay. They had found a place where they could heal and grow and be together. But the next morning, everything changed. Lucy was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard a car coming up the long driveway. Through the window she could see it was a white sedan with official-looking plates. Her heart started pounding. "Ben!" She called out, but he was already walking toward the house from the barn. He had seen the car too, a woman in a business suit. Got out of the car and looked around the ranch. She had a briefcase and a clipboard, and Lucy knew exactly who she was before she even spoke. "I'm looking for Lucy Rodriguez and her two younger brothers," the woman said when Ben approached her. "I'm Mrs. Henderson from Child Protective Services. We've been trying to locate them since their mother passed away last month." Lucy's hands were shaking as she watched from the kitchen window. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading since they left the hospital. They were going to be separated and sent to different homes. Ben was talking to the social worker, but Lucy couldn't hear what they were saying. She saw Mrs. Henderson writing things on her clipboard and looking. Around the ranch with a frown on her face, Carlos and Danny came running into the kitchen, having seen the official car. "Is that the lady who's gonna take us away?" Danny asked. His voice small and scared. Lucy knelt down and hugged both of her brothers. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said honestly. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together. I promised Mama I wouldn't let anyone split us up, and I'm going to keep that promise." Outside, Ben was still talking to Mrs. Henderson. Lucy watched him gesture toward the house, then toward the barn where Star was kept. He was telling her their story, explaining how they had ended up at the ranch and why they needed to stay together. The social worker listened, but her expression didn't change. She kept writing on her clipboard and asking questions. Finally, she started walking toward the house. Lucy took a deep breath. This was the fight of her life, and she wasn't going to give up without trying everything she could to keep her family together. Mrs. Henderson knocked on the front door with the kind of firm, official knock that made everyone inside freeze. Lucy opened the door with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. "You must be Lucy Rodriguez," the social worker said, looking at her clipboard. "I'm Mrs. Henderson from Child Protective Services. May I come in?" Lucy nodded and stepped aside, even though every part of her wanted to slam the door and run. Carlos and Danny stood behind her, both looking terrified. Ben came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm Ben Morrison. We spoke outside. These kids have been staying with me." Mrs. Henderson looked around the house, writing notes on her clipboard. Lucy could see her taking in everything, the clean but old furniture, the family photos Ben had put up of him, and his late brother, the breakfast dishes still on the table. "Mr. Morrison, I understand you've been harboring these children for several weeks without reporting their whereabouts to the authorities," she said in a voice that sounded like she was reading from a rule book. "I wasn't harboring anyone," Ben said calmly. "3 scared kids showed up at my door with nowhere to go. What was I supposed to do? Turn them away?" Mrs. Henderson didn't answer that question. Instead, she turned to Lucy. "Young lady, do you understand how worried everyone has been? The hospital, the police, social services, we've all been looking for you." Lucy felt her face getting hot. "We weren't trying to cause trouble. We just didn't want to be separated." "That's not your decision to make," Mrs. Henderson said. "You're minors. You need proper care and supervision." "They've had proper care," Ben said, his voice getting a little sharper. "They've been fed, clothed, and looked after. They're going to school through the homeschool program. They help with chores and they're learning responsibility." Mrs. Henderson looked at him like he was a stranger who had picked up kids off the street, which Lucy realized was exactly what he was in the eyes of the law. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sure you mean well, but you're not a licensed foster parent. You haven't been through background checks or training. These children need to be placed in approved homes." "Separate homes," Lucy said quietly. Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable. "We try to keep siblings together when possible, but with 3 children, it's not always feasible. Carlos and Danny might be able to stay together, but Lucy, at 17, you'd likely be placed in a group home or independent living program." Danny started crying. Not the quiet tears he'd been holding back, but real sobs that shook his whole body. Carlos put his arm around his little brother, but Lucy could see that Carlos was fighting back tears too. "Please," Lucy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're happy here. We're not causing any problems. Can't we just stay?" "It's not that simple," Mrs. Henderson said. "There are legal procedures, court hearings, background checks. Mr. Morrison would need to apply to become your legal guardian, and that process takes months. Even then, there's no guarantee it would be approved." Ben stepped forward. "Then let's start the process." "What do I need to do?" Mrs. Henderson looked surprised. "Mr. Morrison, becoming a guardian is a serious commitment. These children would be your responsibility financially and legally until they turn 18. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been prepared for it since the day they showed up," Ben said without hesitation. Lucy stared at him. She had hoped he cared about them, but she hadn't expected him to be willing to fight the system to keep them. Mrs. Henderson spent the next hour asking questions and filling out forms. She wanted to know about Ben's income, his health, his living situation. She inspected the house, checking that there were working smoke detectors and that the children had adequate beds and clothing. She also talked to each of the kids separately. When it was Lucy's turn, Mrs. Henderson took her out to the front porch. "Lucy, I need you to be honest with me," she said. "Has Mr. Morrison ever made you feel uncomfortable? Has he ever touched you inappropriately or asked you to do anything that made you feel unsafe?" Lucy was shocked by the question. "No, Ben would never do anything like that. He's been nothing but kind to us." "And you're sure you want to stay here? You wouldn't prefer to be with a family that has experience with children your age?" Lucy thought about it for a moment. "Mrs. Henderson, before we came here, I was taking care of my brothers by myself. I was working 2 part-time jobs and trying to keep us fed and housed. I was 17 years old, and I felt like I was drowning. Here, I'm still 17, but I'm not drowning anymore. Ben doesn't treat us like charity cases. He treats us like family." Mrs. Henderson made more notes on her clipboard. When she was done talking to all of them, she gathered everyone in the living room. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "I'm required to file a report about the children's current living situation. Mr. Morrison, if you're serious about pursuing guardianship, you'll need to contact the family court and begin the application process immediately." "What happens to the kids while we're waiting?" Ben asked. Mrs. Henderson looked at her paperwork. "Given that the children appear to be well cared for and want to remain here, and given that Lucy is nearly 18, I'm willing to allow them to stay temporarily. But Mr. Morrison, you'll need to complete the guardian application within 30 days, and there will be regular check-ins." Lucy felt like she could breathe again for the first time since she'd seen the white car coming up the driveway. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Henderson said. "Lucy, you mentioned that your mother's brother might have some claim to you children. Have you had any contact with him?" Lucy's blood went cold. She had forgotten about Uncle Miguel. He was Mama's younger brother, but they hadn't seen him in years. He had problems with drinking and had been in and out of jail several times. "We haven't seen him since I was maybe 12, Lucy said. "Why? Because he contacted our office last week? He says he wants custody of you and your brothers." The room went completely silent. Danny stopped crying and just stared at Mrs. Henderson. Carlos looked like he might be sick. "He can't take us," Lucy said, her voice shaking. "He doesn't even know us anymore, and he's not a good person." "I understand your concerns," Mrs. Henderson said. "But as your closest blood relative, he does have rights. There will need to be a hearing to determine what's in your best interests." Ben stood up from his chair. "When is this hearing?" 2 weeks from today. Mr. Morrison, I strongly suggest you get that guardianship application filed as soon as possible. And you might want to consider getting a lawyer." After Mrs. Henderson left, the 4 of them sat in the living room in stunned silence. Just when Lucy had started to believe they were safe, everything was falling apart again. "What do we know about your uncle?" Ben asked finally. Lucy didn't want to talk about Uncle Miguel, but she knew Ben needed to understand what they were facing. "The last time we saw him, he came to our apartment asking Mama for money," she said. "He was drunk and he got angry when—" She said no. He called her names and threatened to take us away from her just to hurt her. Mama was so scared that she didn't sleep for 3 days. Ben's jaw tightened. And now he wants custody. He doesn't want us, Carlos said bitterly. He just wants whatever money Mama left behind, Lucy nodded. There was a small life insurance policy from her job. Nothing much, maybe $10,000. But to him, that's a lot of money. Then we'll fight him, Ben said simply. I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. You kids belong here, and I'm not letting anyone take you away. Lucy looked at this man who had already given them so much and was now willing to give even more. For the first time since Mama died, she felt like maybe they really could win this fight. The courthouse was bigger than Lucy had expected. She sat between Carlos and Danny on a hard wooden bench, wearing the nicest clothes they had, which wasn't saying much. Ben sat next to them in his only suit, which looked like it hadn't been worn in years but was clean and pressed. Across the aisle sat Uncle Miguel with his lawyer. Lucy hadn't seen her uncle in 5 years, and he looked worse than she remembered. His face was thin and pale, and his hands shook slightly when he picked up his water glass. But he was dressed in a new suit and had gotten a haircut, clearly, trying to make a good impression on the judge. "Don't look at him," Lucy whispered to her brothers. "Just remember what we practiced." Ben's lawyer, Mrs. Chun, was a small woman with a kind smile who had spent hours preparing them for this day. She had explained that Uncle Miguel's lawyer would try to make Ben look like a stranger who had no business raising children, while she would focus on what was best for Lucy, Carlos, and Danny. "The most important thing," Mrs. Chun had told them, "is to be honest. Tell the judge how you feel and what you want. Your voices matter in this decision." When the judge called their case, Lucy's heart started pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Judge Williams was an older black woman with gray hair and serious eyes. She looked at everyone in the courtroom before speaking. "This is a custody hearing to determine guardianship of Lucy Rodriguez, age 17, Carlos Rodriguez, age 10, and Danny Rodriguez, age 8. Mr. Miguel Rodriguez is petitioning for custody as the children's biological uncle. Mr. Ben Morrison is petitioning for guardianship as their current caretaker." Uncle Miguel's lawyer stood up first. He was a young man in an expensive suit who talked fast and used a lot of big words. He argued that blood family was always better than strangers, that Uncle Miguel had changed his life around and was ready to take responsibility for his sister's children. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "Mr. Rodriguez deeply regrets his past mistakes. He has completed a substance abuse program and has been sober for 6 months. He has a stable job and a 2-bedroom apartment. These children belong with their family, not with a man they barely know." When it was Uncle Miguel's turn to speak, he stood up and faced the judge. Lucy could see that his hands were still shaking. "Your Honor, these are my sister's kids. Rosa would want them with family, not with some stranger. I know I made mistakes before, but I'm different now. I'm sober, I got a job at the warehouse, and I want to make things right." The judge asked him several questions about his sobriety, his living situation, and his plans for the children. Uncle Miguel answered them all carefully, like he had practiced. But when Judge Williams asked him about the children's specific needs and interests, he looked confused. "Well, they're good kids," he said. "Lucy's almost grown, so she won't need much. The boys just need food and a place to sleep, right? Kids are pretty easy." Lucy saw Mrs. Chun write something down on her notepad, and it was Ben's turn. Mrs. Chun called him to the witness stand, and he walked up slowly, his cowboy boots clicking on the floor. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "can you tell the court how you came to know these children?" Ben looked at the judge and spoke in his calm, steady voice. "They showed up at my ranch about 2 months ago. Their car had broken down, and they were scared and hungry. Lucy told me their mama had just died and they had nowhere to go. And why did you decide to help them?" "Because I knew their mama Rosa from 20 years ago. She worked on my brother's ranch one summer, and we all loved her like family. When her kids needed help, it felt like the right thing to do." Mrs. Chun asked Ben about his experience with children, his financial situation, and his plans for their future. Ben answered every question honestly, talking about how the ranch was doing better with their help, how the kids were thriving in their homeschool program, and how they had each found their place in the family. "Mr. Morrison," Mrs. Chun said, "what would it mean to you if the court granted you guardianship?" Ben was quiet for a moment, looking at Lucy, Carlos, and Danny. "It would mean everything. These kids have brought life back to a place that was pretty lonely. They're not just staying at my ranch, they're home." Uncle Miguel's lawyer cross-examined Ben, trying to make him look like an old bachelor who didn't know how to raise children. But Ben stayed calm and answered every question with quiet confidence. Then came the hardest part. The judge wanted to hear from the children themselves. Carlos went first. He walked up to the witness stand looking small and nervous, but when Judge William smiled at him, he seemed to relax a little. "Carlos," the judge said gently, "can you tell me about living at the ranch?" "It's good," Carlos said quietly. "Ben lets me help with the horses. There's one named Star who was scared like me, but now she trusts me. Ben says I'm good with animals." "And how do you feel about your Uncle Miguel?" Carlos looked down at his hands. "I don't really remember him much. He came to our house once and made Mama cry." "I don't want to live with someone who made Mama cry." Danny's turn was next. He was so nervous he could barely speak above a whisper, but the judge was patient. "With him? Danny, what's your favorite thing about the ranch?" she asked. "Rusty," Danny said, his face lighting up. "He's Ben's dog, but he's old and his legs hurt. I help him get around, and he sleeps on my bed at night. Ben says Rusty chose me to be his special person." "And how would you feel if you had to leave the ranch?" Danny's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to leave Rusty. He needs me. And Ben reads me stories every night, just like Mama used to do." Finally, it was Lucy's turn. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. But when she sat down and looked at Judge Williams, she felt a strange sense of calm. "Lucy," the judge said, "you're almost 18. In a few months, you'll be able to make your own decisions about where to live." "Why is this hearing important to you?" Lucy took a deep breath. "Because my brothers need me and I need them. We promised Mama we'd stay together no matter what. If Uncle Miguel gets custody, I'm scared he'll put Carlos and Danny in foster care when I turn 18. He doesn't really want us. He just wants the insurance money Mama left." "That's a serious accusation. What makes you think that?" "Because he told Mama once that she was stupid for working so hard for us kids. He said we were just a burden." "People don't change that much, especially when there's money involved." The judge asked Lucy about her life at the ranch, her education, and her future plans. Lucy talked about how Ben had helped her enroll in community college courses, how she was learning to manage the ranch's finances, and how for the first time since Mama died, she felt like she could breathe. "Lucy," Judge Williams said finally, "if I were to grant guardianship to Mr. Morrison, how would that make you feel?" Lucy looked over at Ben, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Like we finally found our way home," she said. "Ben doesn't just take care of us. He loves us. He makes us feel like we matter, like we're wanted. That's all any kid really needs." After all the testimony was finished, the judge said she needed time to review everything and make her decision. The waiting was the hardest part. They all sat in the hallway outside the courtroom for what felt like hours. Finally, they were called back in. Judge Williams looked at her papers, then at everyone in the room. "This has been a difficult decision," she said. "Both parties clearly care about these children in their own way. However, the court's primary concern must be what serves the children's best interests." Lucy held her breath. "After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, I find that the children have formed strong, healthy bonds with Mr. Morrison. They are thriving in his care, both emotionally and educationally. While I respect Mr. Rodriguez's desire to care for his sister's children, his lack of recent involvement in their lives and his limited understanding of their individual needs concerns me." Uncle Miguel's face turned red, and his lawyer whispered something in his ear. "Therefore," Judge Williams continued, "I am granting full guardianship of Lucy Carlos and Danny Rodriguez to Mr. Ben Morrison, effective immediately." Lucy felt like she might faint from relief. Carlos started crying happy tears, and Danny jumped up and ran to Ben, who caught him in a big hug. Furthermore, the judge said, I am ordering that Mr. Miguel Rodriguez have no contact with these children unless they specifically request it when they become adults. Uncle Miguel stood up angrily, but his lawyer pulled him back down and whispered urgently in his ear. After a moment, Uncle Miguel grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the courtroom without looking back. Judge Williams smiled at them for the first time all day. Mr. Morrison, these children are now legally your responsibility. I trust you'll continue to provide them with the love and stability they clearly need. Yes, Your Honor, then said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Lucy realized that Mama had been right all those years ago. Sometimes the people who aren't related to you by blood become the most important family you'll ever have. That evening, they sat on the front porch of the ranch watching the sunset. Rusty was curled up next to Danny, and Carlos was telling them about his plans to train Star to be a therapy horse for other kids who had been through trauma.